frightening aspect of the UN report is the author's intent that the personal toll behind the statistical analysis must be addressed. In June, when the report was released, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, called for compensation for the victims, as well as an end to the violence and accountability for past and current violations. The starting point to achieve the report's momentous recommendations is setting up a committee of inquiry, and I quote, to conduct a comprehensive, independent international investigation into allegations of human rights violations in Kashmir. When I met with the Pakistan Foreign Minister, he said his government is ready to cooperate with the UN proposals. That means the recommendations directed to Pakistan, and most importantly, cooperating with the UN, setting up this independent investigation that would enter the disputed territories. The report sets out 17 and 7 sets of recommendations, respectively, for the Indian-Pakistan governments to act on. While Pakistan was named as an abuser of human rights in the report notes that they, and I quote, are of a different calibre or magnitude and of a more structural nature. In drawing out this distinction, my intent is not to fly a flag for Pakistan, but put a spotlight on the need for Western countries, like Australia, to consider how they deal with the Indian government, so it becomes harder for our Indian Ocean neighbour to maintain a rogue response in the face of this important UN report. Currently, the Indian government is hostile to the report and its recommendations. The Indian Ministry for External Affairs has said the report is fallacious, tendentious and motivated. They even question why such a report was even released. Now, the report was actually released on June the 14th, and it's significant to remember what happens 8 days later. On June the 22nd, the Indian government barred foreign journalists from travelling anywhere in Kashmir without prior permission. And that's clearly been seen that action was taken to stamp out and censor what was happening in Kashmir, because the reports that I was given was that report gave hope to the people of Kashmir, but we heard so little about it because of that effective censorship, because all reporters were banned from going unless they had permission. In considering the future of Kashmir, we need to discuss what is happening in India. I find the situation under Prime Minister Modi very troubling, and not just because of the growing inequality and hardship millions of Indians face. I note that some commentators are reporting on the disturbing actions of Modi's party and the Hindu nationalists who are using a range of tactics, some illegal, to eliminate what they deem to be anti-national thought and activities. This is having a chilling effect on Indian civil society and independent media coverage. Then there is the worrying closeness in the relationship between the Indian and Israeli prime ministers. The Indian government's policy shift towards Israel is considerable. India buys 41% of Israel's total arms exports. Israeli arms delegations have visited the Kashmir region to promote its weaponry for crowd control and surveillance, and to share its expertise in fighting Palestinians with the Indian armed forces. And then there is the sinister development of Israeli-style settlements for Hindus in Kashmir, which is clearly a means to occupy Kashmiri land and intentionally to actually make it harder to resolve this issue. Many Western governments, including Australia, are muting their criticism of India because they do not want to jeopardise trade opportunities with this nation of 1.35 million. Sadly, many nations, and our own, and Australia, have a history of putting their own interests before that of the human rights of oppressed communities. So in terms of India's approach to Kashmir, it is hard to find any good news. India has banned media coverage and it has rejected the UN report and its recommendations. The chance of pressure from Western countries in support of the UN report is still unknown. Now, having said that, it is important that we push the Australian government, as we not only have historic links with the Kashmiri region, We are currently a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council. The UN report and how its recommendations will be managed should be a regular Council agenda item, and Australia should ensure that happens. And I believe we need to be putting pressure on the Australian government to ensure that is the case. Surely the Australian government should lobby the Indian government to lift the ban on foreign journalists going to Kashmir and to support the Committee of Inquiry going ahead. We also need to do everything to facilitate the independent investigation, having free access within Indian-occupied Kashmir in the same way that Pakistan has agreed to. While my suggestions about actions the Australian government should take are logical, we know that logic is not the driver of foreign affairs decisions. So while we need to find organisations and sympathetic politicians to put a pressure on the Australian government, I would like to suggest that our priority has to be mobilising public opinion in support of people of Kashmir and Jammu. We need to face the fact that this is one of the most ignored and least reported oppressed regions and international flashpoints there is. I was ashamed how little I knew about the Kashmir situation. I'm 67, I've been involved in politics for 50 years, and I thought, and particularly international solidarity issues, and I really knew so little about it. And to share you why I think that is, that the progressive movement hasn't followed it, that we've largely thought that it's just this fight between India and Pakistan, and that, well, what can we do about it? But there is a great deal we can do about it, and I think that that's where one of the issues that we need to address within the progressive community in Australia and the world. Now, I grew up with the campaigns to end the war in Vietnam and apartheid in South Africa. What played a crucial role in the people of those nations being able to determine their own future was the actions of people in other countries. Now, I'm not saying that in a patronising way. I'm saying that because I've heard it said from the people in those struggles. I've heard Vietnamese leaders and Nelson Mandela, actually when he was in Australia, speak most warmly of the role of international solidarity played in their own struggles. There is support for the people of Kashmir and Jammu in many countries. I hope that we can link up and build a global voice for the people of this region, and we have a great opportunity with this United Nations report. Before I finish up, I would like to speak about the armed struggle in Kashmir. In making these comments, I wish to emphasise I'm not promoting armed struggle. However, we must note that people like the Kashmiris, like the Palestinians, like Aborigines in Australia, like the people who fought in the French Revolution, and the Jewish people who resisted in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Kashmiris have a legal right to resist occupation. This is a legal right set out in the 1960 Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples and the Fourth Geneva Convention and its subsequent protocols. And if you're interested in looking at that in more detail, United Nations Resolution 37-43, dated the 3rd of December 1982, sets it out very clearly. Again, I emphasise I'm not advocating armed struggle, but as I said, it's a legal right. Why I'm speaking about that is because, again, I noticed in recent days more people have died, have been killed in Kashmir. And I was actually given the alarming figures when I was in Kashmir, that there are more than 250,000 Indian soldiers, border guards and police who together outnumber the militants 1,000 to 1. And I saw the photographs and I see the videos, often of very young people who are dying in this struggle. And that will continue to happen unless we raise our voice to the international level. The way to end the tragic deaths and ongoing violence. And by the way, when I visited the line of control, a Pakistani military officer told me that there are more than 1,000 military incidents a year along the disputed border. That's more than 3 a day on average. So the way to end the violence and the deaths of so many young people and people of all generations is to provide hope for all generations that peace and justice can be achieved and their human rights restored. Until we restore that hope, I fear that more young people will be killed fighting for what is their right, and we will see those very sad YouTubes of their burials. The former UN Human Rights head, Al Hussein, had the courage to initiate the report on Kashmir. Now is the time to finish the job, to show similar courage and take a stand for Kashmiri human rights and to end violence in the region. Thank you very much.